right? And so clearly I still hold the automation banner because at the end of the day, we don't want smart people doing things that are mundane and repetitive. That's not to say that manual testing is something that needs to disappear. I mean, there's a great case for exploratory testing, but guess what? If you get rid of some of the mundane stuff that testers do today, that just opens them up for doing, more activities that requires their intellect and their curiosity and their exploratory nature, right? So, too many testers get sucked into the manual requirement. Mobile is a great example because out of necessity, we have tens or hundreds of thousands of people doing manual tests because there's no good automation that they can find for mobile testing. And how ridiculous is that, Mark? Now we've taken a problem that's more complex than anything we've ever seen with web browsers and everything else. A test matrix that's multidimensional, and we're throwing a bunch of manual testers at it instead of trying to figure out, oh my goodness, if there ever was a case for automation, this is it.
I think it's a false choice for somebody to say, well, I'm either going to be a manual tester or an automated tester. I think that was maybe 20 years ago that might have been fair. Because just general test automation tools, they were equally about the limited. You had about four or five options. One of them was, start from scratch and build it your own. I mean, why should a tester have to choose one path like that? Let's say I'm a new tester, Brad, and I choose. Look, I know I have to learn some automation tools, and I know I have to, sort of study the philosophical parts of good testing, epistemological argument, and be able to craft personality, collaboration skills, all the other intellectual parts of testing, and I put that in my career path. How do I choose of these thousands of different tools? How would you tell a tester, hey, kind of figure out your path, and here's the tools you need to go with you? Have you done that?
That's a great question. You choose the tools that are going to make you more effective at whatever those things are, right? More effective at communicating quickly to the people that need to know, right? The tools that are better at helping you determine one of the classic problems of testing, what to test, right? The tools that help you get out of the case of the redundant, mundane work that keeps you from doing the intelligent, exploratory work that you should be doing. Right. So I think it's a matter of, it depends on where you are in the organization. Are you on the business side? Are you closer to development? I will say that one of the things that I see getting in the way of a lot of testers is this, frankly, silly argument between should I, know how to be a coder or not. If you are going to interface with developers, you probably should understand their world, right? So it doesn't hurt to learn a little coding and a little bit of how to do some script automation.
Right.
But then again, if you're on the business side, you just better be very good at understanding how do I effectively capture and communicate what my actual users are doing, and then put it into the terms, whether it's a written document or some other format, so that my developers can actually understand what it is that they're developing against, and specifically for my test automation engineers, so that they can effectively build that automation.
Yeah, you bring up something interesting about team collaboration. I was just talking to Anna Roisman, who brought up this particular book. I'm thinking the name is something. It's about interactional expertise, and I'll share it in the notes. I think it's called Trading Zones is the name of the book, Trading Zone, something like that. But it talks about these collaborative skills where, when as a tester you're talking to a developer or you're talking to a business person or maybe an ops admin person, they're changing their language a little bit for you, and you have to be willing to change your language a little bit for them. So in a communication or language standpoint, you're creating a pidgin language. And so some people are like, it's all or none. You either learn how to code or you don't. When actually everyone's kind of bending a little bit To that point, we were just talking about Ben Simo and doing some amazing stuff with like analytics and graphing and doing kind of mining log analysis. And he was talking to business people as you were the scenario he's working in. He was actually collaborating from a test perspective with business people. And is that a good example as well? He knows how to code, but for that role, he had to learn sort of the analytics capability.
Yeah, and I kind of love the evolution of a guy like Ben's career, because he's as you know been a performance guy. Yep. He's been in the testing community for a long time. Yeah. Well known and respected as a speaker, and he's got himself in a role really in marketing, right?
Yeah.
Imagine that.
I can imagine that.
but the point is, because what he's doing is mining the information that is found inside of the company's systems, right? To be able to help them, understand how to improve, the technology used to run the business, and be more competitive, because they can be faster in a specific area. And this is what's really interesting, and I definitely see as an evolution, is that one of the things we ask customers is, how fast is fast enough, right? How do you know? I love to be controversial, and you know what? The world that you and I have lived in, Mark, for the last 10 years or so, for a good majority of that time, we were out there saying, oh my goodness, if your website isn't faster than 2 seconds, that's horrible.
Yeah.
Whoever made that up? Right? Because at the end of the day, you and I both know that when we look at a mobile app, we'll sit there for 13 seconds waiting for something to happen.
Oh yeah.
Now that's too slow. I think everybody in the world will agree. But patience levels of different users vary based on who they are, where they're coming from, what they're looking at. How important that is to them.
Yeah.
And so what guys like Ben are doing, and what products that we're developing and have developed help you do, is understand how fast is fast enough. And that, if you think about it, helps you determine what's the best performance test case for the next version of my application. Should I be tuning my infrastructure to support 2 seconds of response time on average globally? The answer is no.
Probably not.
Should I be tuning for my Northeast users for 2 seconds or less? Probably. Should I be tuning for 6.5 seconds for my users in Australia? Yes.
And there's that one town south of Birmingham, Alabama, which is is really slow. I mean, they take a lot of time. So 13 seconds might be totally cool with them. They might love it. Like the Slowskis. They might.
Nice. I like
we
it.
prefer
That's
things.
for sure.
Well, there's also another thing, like you say. Once you figure out what is important to test, you might prove or disprove your hypothesis about what's important to build or optimize based on what you're learning and what the context is. So, like you say, geographically, well, is there really a panic happening? Oh my gosh, look at all this traffic. Things are going really slow. We need to pay attention to Spain and France. And then you look at the date and you're like, oh, that's really not a performance outage. That's just the World Cup or something in Brazil. Right. There's all these different sort of global contexts, but also individual contexts, which are, 13 seconds is too slow if I'm about to get on at the gate and getting on a plane.
Yeah, and if I look at things like bounce rate, right? How do I know if somebody sits on a site for five? Tell you what, let me change that. If 75% of my users sit on my site for 5 seconds and then still go do something that I care about, then I might not have to worry about that, right?
Yeah.
But again, if somebody comes to my site and waits for 1.5 seconds and then abandons, or they don't convert, or I start losing business, then that's an area that I would want to tune. And that might be a very specific set of users, or a very specific technology set that we're running on, right? So one of our and then what I love about products like like Impulse, which allows you to look at what real users are doing in production, is we have one customer who's a very well-known employer rating site.
Okay.
Very, very popular in the U.S., and that's primarily where they focused their efforts.
Yeah.
And when they began looking at real users, they were very surprised by the fact that 8 to 10% of their users were not in the U.S. They were coming from Europe and India.
Yeah.
And so they didn't even really pay any attention to that until they saw it in front of their eyes, and they went, whoa, maybe we should be building the app to support those users in any other part of the world, because it's 10% of our load. So that's where we test what we know, right? We build test cases based on a best case guess in many cases. And if you're building a new app, what are you going to do? But at the end of the day, the best information is from reality. And so let's take that information and quickly iterate. And if we're in a continuous or an agile process that's possible, quickly iterate and make sure that we get that information back to development and really write test cases driven from, hey, look, you know what? I have users with this global distribution, this percentage of Chrome and Safari and IE users and this much mobile, that actually can populate a test case. Yeah. And again, if I can do it with reality, why would I do it, with guesswork?
Yeah, in a fascinating way to connect this conversation, what has to do with understanding what needs to be tested. Seth Elliott also talks a lot about data-driven quality, and it's very similar to that. The idea of the earlier comments just about speed, and let's say you're a QA manager, and maybe you're a QA testing architect with a whole bunch of manual testers, and you're designing your test matrix in, I'll say, a very objective sense, and you're on an old metric for testing, which is, percentage test coverage according to the code and code reviews and kind of the old school, and you're completely disconnected from the prioritization based on real world experience with real users in the real world. I think to that, Jane, get me off this crazy thing. If you're bringing that old school test matrix, test coverage, manual test, there's no way you're putting what I would say, you're not putting the business or the customer first in your test.
You're not, and I'll be blunt. No better way to be ignored down the road.
Yeah.
And there's something interesting. I just read. I don't know if I think IBM put it out, and IBM. There was a thing lately about the future of testing and testers. And I read one interesting statistic, and that was that most testers who were interviewed did not see their development cycles decreasing or their testing cycles decreasing. And that really concerned me because if you ask, operations people and business people and developers, are they seeing their, delivery cycles, decreasing? The answer seems to be, a resounding yes. Kind of worried that a lot of testers have not actually adapted their testing processes to the pace of what's happening around them, and then sometimes we wonder, why things like testing is dead type of things come out, and I think the concern here is that, and this is a theme of another show, was are we being relevant to our business? Right? Are we actually, adding value, or are we just adding time? And in which case, we really need to analyze how can we get better?
Mm-hmm. And how can we find mechanisms like session-based test management to make sure that every minute that we're exercising our brains on behalf of the company, that something's coming out of it that somebody will find valuable in some way.
No question.
To the acceleration point, and you mentioned test is dead, our favorite guy, Alberto Savoia. He had a lot of scathing feedback from the testing world, but he was just using different language to describe, I think he calls it prototyping or rapid prototyping. Yeah. But that's what continuous deployment delivery is doing. If you can in your company do small pilots and lots of frequent feedback, That's all he was describing. Do the minimum amount of prototyping to get feedback, so that round of feedback gives you fodder for more analysis, more point correction in your course of actions, and feedback to what needs to be corrected or scaled. And so I think there was nothing wrong. He just didn't. He called it testing.